Leo Varadkar met Boris Johnson today in a last-ditch attempt to resolve EU-UK backstop conflicts, but an unearthed comment piece by Daniel McConnell warned that, after the Brexit referendum, Ireland risked being increasingly isolated within the EU. Westminster and Dublin, along with the rest of the EU, have been stuck in Brexit negotiations ever since Parliament repeatedly voted down Theresa May's Brexit deal. Many Brexiteers protested against the inclusion of Mrs May's so-called backstop, a temporary measure which would mean there were no border posts, physical barriers or checks on people or goods crossing over the Irish border. While the EU negotiators and Mr Varadkar argue this is the only way to maintain peace between the two nations, Mr Johnson's supporters believe this would go against the very point of Brexit, arguing that Northern Ireland would effectively still be part of the EU, involved in its customs union and single market. Unionists also believe this would cause Northern Ireland to be separated from the rest of the UK. Mr Varadkar has argued against this and instead sided with the EU. He claimed that a deal must be reached, as a no-deal Brexit would cause severe disruption and not necessarily mean the end of the Brexit process. He has been accused of playing happy families with EU, being the Euro-Spaniel, and being anti-Brexit. However, in a 2016 Irish Examiner article published days after the UK voted to leave the EU, political commentator Daniel McConnell argued Ireland was actually being isolated by the trading bloc it saw as one of its greatest allies. Mr McConnell said, "In a Europe that has become increasingly a club for the big boys, Ireland's fate is now far less certain than before. As the old saying goes, there may be trouble ahead." The commentator used several examples to demonstrate his point, beginning with Ireland's relationship to the EU in 2008. He added, "The big boys wanted Ireland contained by way of a Troika program and we got eaten alive. The Troika scheme, otherwise known as the bailout program, was supposed to help Ireland with its finances, and was signed under the Taoiseach Brian Cowen in 2010. It was a 3-year scheme which imposed austerity on society to reduce government expenditure. Ireland left in 2013, but it did more damage to public confidence in our relationship with Europe than anything else." He then referred to Europe's refusal to stand with Ireland on the 29th of September, 2008, when the crisis first began, so Ireland had to act by itself but with one arm tied behind its back. After promising Europe that no European bank would fail, Ireland had to pay €440 billion of taxpayers' money to keep its banks alive. Many think, including Fianna Fáil's Dara Calleary, the EU walked away from Ireland when the member state was struggling with the financial crisis. He said the day after the Brexit referendum, "I firmly believe the European institutions walked away from us in our time of need." Mr Calleary added the bloc rammed home an austerity program which did not stand for anything in terms of cuts and that was wrong and removed from the principles of the European Union. He also said, "We have to look into our own hearts and ask if there was a referendum on our membership of the European Union in the morning, how it would go. We cannot give a guarantee as we used to." Mr McConnell continued, "Calleary's points are justifiable in the context of Europe moving to become more than the original trading union envisaged in the wake of World War II. A fully integrated political and financial union is not a concept that many Irish people are fully comfortable with." He then referred to how Ireland initially rejected the Lisbon Treaty and the Nice Treaty. Mr Calleary was the junior finance minister under Brian Cowen and during the financial crash of 2008. As commentator Mr McConnell explained, Calleary saw firsthand how rough the treatment from the great and good in Europe can be. In comparison, the political expert said Mr Varadkar's party Fine Gael is known for being pro-European. Most in Fine Gael have for decades signed up to a near-blind loyalty to the European project, sometimes bordering on devotion. Mr Varadkar has so far rejected several of Mr Johnson's suggestions. Most recently, the Prime Minister had a new proposal which was dubbed Two Borders, for 4 years, where Northern Ireland would be able to choose between staying with the EU's single market rules or a hard border with Ireland in a vote every 4 years. Mr Varadkar claimed this appears to create two borders in the north. He said, "What's being put on the table by Prime Minister Johnson is not supported by businesses in Northern Ireland, by civil society and is only supported by one political party." Mr Johnson and Mr Varadkar agreed they were on a pathway to a deal after their meeting today in the Wirral.